I worked for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police for 8 years, and in that time, I only had to use my sidearm once. A lot of other Metro cops might tell you that's kind of miraculous and that I should consider myself lucky. I do, in a manner of speaking, but those same cops would also admit that my one shooting is worth 3 or 4 of theirs, on sheer circumstance alone. I was driving through North Vegas one night after getting a call to the 7-Eleven on East Owens Avenue. Then on my way back towards the Strip, I'm slowing down as I come up to some lights when I spot something weird on James Street to my right. There was a car parked on the sidewalk with all the lights inside the car switched on, and it looked like the driver was slumped over in a sort of unnatural position. I didn't have any other calls, so I figured I'd drive around the block and then roll past him real slow to see if he was okay. And lo and behold, there's a guy passed out in the driver's seat of his car. So after a quick look around the driver and passenger's side to check for weapons or narcotics, I knocked on his window a few times to wake him up. The guy looked to be maybe in his late 30s, Hispanic, with a closely cropped haircut and what looked like work gear on. And when I knocked on his window, he woke up startled. One of the first words out of his mouth were, "Oh my God, officer, I'm so sorry. This is literally my house right here. I think I just nodded off for a little bit and parked here." I asked him where he'd come from, and he told me that he worked nights at a chemical plant over in Henderson. He'd spent all day doing something for his family, then had to work right after, so after running on almost 24 hours on no sleep, he must have passed out as soon as it was safe to close his eyes for a few minutes. Now normally, I'd have to perform a field sobriety check on this guy, but he genuinely did seem exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his speech was pretty groggy, but it was clearing up more and more by the second. He didn't smell like booze and his ID checked out, but there was still something that didn't sit right with me. When I asked him which chemical plant he worked for, he said Olin Chloralkali. But I had a cousin in the chemical industry and he worked on the same Henderson industrial park, only at a company called Borman. Borman was the only chemical company running night shifts at the time, so if he didn't work for Borman, he couldn't have been working as anything but an overnight security guard. But since he was dressed for a manufacturing line or some other kind of heavy work, there was no explanation as to why he'd be out so late. I ran his ID, and the guy's record consisted of nothing but a few late parking fines, but I figured just to be certain, I'd run a field sobriety test and maybe search his vehicle if I noticed anything during the testing. In worst case scenario, I'd minorly inconvenience this dude, and he'd probably understand my reasons for doing so given how chill he was being. But best case scenario, I'd find whatever was making my spidey senses tingle in this situation. I'd caught the guy in a lie, a small one, but whenever that happens, you gotta remind yourself that no one with innocent or wholesome intentions tells casual lies like that, especially not to cops. So I head back to the dude's car and ask if he'd mind undergoing a quick sobriety check. He responds by saying, "No, not at all, officer." But then there's a slightly awkward pause before he says, "You want me to do it now?" I nod and he just sort of looks back at me as if to say, "Really? I thought we were cool." I explained to him that as much as I appreciate how tired he is and how hard he's been working, I've been ordered to perform a check on him given the circumstances. I promised to make it as fast as possible so we could get him inside and into bed, but that I had to do, or risk making my sergeant angry, you see. And that was total BS, but I figured if he could give me a little, I could give him a little. But instead of getting out of the car, the guy's arm, which had been resting on the door where the rolled-down window was, disappeared behind the door where I couldn't see it. This is a big no-no when dealing with cops, especially during a traffic stop or any kind of vehicular-based interaction. You can call me a bootlicker, tell me your taxes pay my wages, or that you're going to get me fired, but as long as you keep your hands at 10 and 2, I'm usually chill. You start putting your hands in places I can't see them, and I start getting nervous. I take a quick step towards the guy, hand on my sidearm, and tell him very politely to keep his hands where I could see them. He throws them both up, saying, Okay, officer, chill out." But they start drooping down again the moment we start arguing about the sobriety test. I had to physically pin the guy's left arm to the door to keep him from reaching, but he kept telling me, It's okay, I don't have any weapons in the car, I'm just trying to unlock the door." I then told him to unlock the door with his other hand, and that's when he grabbed it. The guy had a gun tucked behind his back in the driver's seat, and I was so focused on what his left arm was reaching for, I considered that the whole time he was reaching down for leverage, so he pushed himself forward a little, grabbed the gun, and started shooting at me. One of his bullets hit my left arm, but my gun was in my right, so I dropped back out of his arc of fire and then just unloaded through the rear passenger window, putting bullets to the driver's seat and into the dude's center mass. My left arm refused to work on me, so I had to grab my radio with my right, still holding onto my gun in order to call in that I'd been hit. This put me at a huge disadvantage for a second or two, and if the dude had still been a threat, he could have taken me out with a few well-timed and well-placed shots, but thankfully, he was in no position to do that. After I called it in, I immediately trained my sidearm back on him and then instinctually started barking out commands. I was scared out of my mind, with no idea of what to do. I didn't want to shoot the guy again, but disarming or detaining him was out of the question thanks to the bullet that he put through my arm. I remember how I stopped barking commands at him for a second only to hear the guy start to weakly say something like, "Why'd you shoot me, man? I'm right outside my house." He said it like he hadn't been the one to open up on me first, like I just shot him for being asleep in his car. And that happens way more than you think too. I once watched a woman flee a traffic stop, crash her car into a family SUV, try to stab the officer who pulled her out of her smoking wreck of a car, and then lie there in cuffs saying, "I didn't do nothing." I guess some people get real scared when they think they're going to go to jail, be it first-timers or serial offenders. Some folks can take it. They grow up in the prison system, I guess. It's like they're home away from home. But others, well, sometimes I think they choose death over giving up whatever they got going on. For example, the guy who blew my left bicep out, you'd think that he was some wanted cartel member with 100 warrants out for him. But no, he'd never been in trouble with the law before. He just couldn't face going without the oxys that he was hooked on. That's all my fellow officers found in his car. One bottle of oxys with no prescription. Now, with no priors and a good attorney, he could have gotten himself a suspended sentence and drug counseling and, at worst, maybe 6 months with good behavior. But then the thought of having to detox in jail, I guess some people really do think that that's a fate worse than death. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.